Now, I know that it's next to impossible to stay around Jason Voorhees, especially if you're anywhere near Crystal Lake, the mute and undead mass murderer's primary hunting grounds. And yet, a kid, barely 13 years old, not only survives Jason, but also manages to live with him, and even do the things he does. So how did this kid manage to survive, and what was the effect that Jason had on him during their 10-day stay together? That's what we've gathered here to find out. Written by Jason Aaron, the 2-issue comic Friday the 13th, How I Spent My Summer, explores the adventures of Davie Falkner and his summer with Jason. We're going to tell you all about this bizarre story, but before we jump in, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos in the future. With that said, let's begin. Entire Friday the 13th, How I Spent My Summer saga explained. The comic gives us a brief introduction to what happened all those years ago in Crystal Lake, how Mrs. Voorhees trusted a few horny camp counselors with her child, her son Jason, who needed strict care and attention. But while the counselors rocked each other up in more ways than one, while they hid under bushes and went into barns to practice the first step of baby-making business, Jason was hounded by the other kids, and the only refuge he could find came in the form of Crystal Lake itself. This vast lake swallowed a young Jason, but what came out of it wasn't the same scared child any longer. Jason was now something else entirely, something very different to what went in. The comic then jumps 50 years ahead after Jason drowned, which sets How I Spent My Summer in the year 2007. Before leaving Jason in the care of the counselors, Mrs. Pamela Voorhees gave her son a few kind words of advice. She said, "Don't ever let anyone tell you you're not special, and don't ever be afraid to stand up for yourself." Well, as we know, Jason would pay heed to his mom's words in ways no one could have imagined. This time around, there was another camp taking place near Crystal Lake. Kids from Camp Piney Woods had gathered around a bonfire, and one of them, possibly the bully among the kids, was narrating the story of Jason, how he drowned and came back with a big-ass machete, all hacking people up and stuff. Of course, Crystal Lake closed down years ago after the initial massacre, but people knew that Jason still came back to these woods looking for anyone crazy enough to set up camp around his lake, and people weren't wrong. Jason did, in fact, prowl those lands like a direwolf, waiting to make its next kill. The kids also knew that he couldn't be killed or stopped, but what made him worse was that he never quit, not until everyone was deader than dead, after which his cycle would all but renew. Among the kids around the bonfire was this young 13-year-old boy, Davie Falkner, who suffered from a bone disorder called craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, which basically means that he had a disfigured face, which would ultimately kill him before he turned 18. However, it seems Davie's disease was going to become his greatest wild card. His facial features often got him into trouble with heartless and insensitive kids, and it was no different that night. A few of them got up, grabbed Davie, and threw him into the lake nearby. Although the water was only 3 feet deep, Davie was unaware of that and thought he was actually going to drown. While the kids looked at him struggling and had their fun, something else was going on in another part of the woods. A couple of camp counselors had snuck off to do it in the woods, and by it, I mean what they usually do in a Friday the 13th film. The girl stopped midway because she heard something out there, but the guy was thinking from his brain between his legs, so he told her to come back and join him. Next thing we know, Jason comes through and does his thing with the machete. Meanwhile, the kids who threw Davie, well, they hear the woman's screams and turn back to find Jason. It was all Old Testament, blood, bones, and ire, until only Davie was left. He would have been killed as well, but his disfigured face saved him, at least for now. Jason took one look at the kid and something clicked in his twisted brain. Just then, a couple of counselors see Davie facing Jason and ask him to run, which he does, and Davie is rescued by them. Meanwhile, Sheriff Tannehill was helping himself to a little devil dust, a little booger sugar, when he got a call on his radio about an attack near Camp Piney Woods. He was absolutely high and went to Piney Woods in that very state, only to find the camp counselors and Davie, but behind them was Jason. Sheriff Tannehill pulls out his gun and fires off a couple of shots at Jason, hits a couple, but mostly he misses, and the ones he misses are caught by the counselors. Next thing we know, Jason takes Davie away as if he was protecting him from Sheriff Tannehill. Left alone at the scene, Tannehill knew that he was going to get blamed for the murder of the counselors, so he brought a blade from his own police vehicle and chopped up the bodies to make it look like Jason's doing. Meanwhile, Jason met with the other cops, and once again, it was an all-out massacre. He ripped one guy's jaws open with his bare hands, and that should tell you about how powerful he really is. 3 hours later, the FBI was on the scene, and they started a citywide hunt for Jason and a rescue op for the abducted kid. Tannehill was asked to head home and rest, but he didn't want to leave the scene of the crime. He knew that he had to be present when they found the kid, because Davie had seen everything and knew that Tannehill had shot the 2 counselors, and it wasn't Jason who killed them. If Davie opened his mouth, Tannehill would be done for good, so it's possible the corrupt junkie sheriff wanted to kill the child to save himself, and that's probably why Jason took Davie along with him. To be honest, Davie Falkner was already having a pretty shit week even before being abducted into the mountains by an undead machete-wielding mass murderer. We're fairly confident now that Davie was having the worst summer vacation in recorded history. And you must agree, right? And that's where the first issue comes to a close. But by the time the second issue starts, something changes in Davie. It has now been 9 days since he was abducted. The FBI and the National Guard continue the search of the hills surrounding Crystal Lake, and they reminded residents to report any and all suspicious activity. Anyways, the first thing we see in the second issue is a caravan, and inside someone's saying grace, but not without requesting Dear Jesus to help America get rid of enemies such as Mexican drug lords and gays. I guess Crystal Lake just brings out the crazies, right? Well, we'll get to know who this person is in just a bit, but coming back to Davie, he's spent 9 days out here living in the wild without any tent or supplies. He was the prisoner of a mute mass murderer who killed anything he saw. He was chased night and day by an army of men with guns, and as for Davie, he had slept in caves, killed small animals with his bare hands, and eaten raw meat. He hadn't brushed his teeth or taken a shower in a week. In short, he had nobody around him telling him what to do. In other words, and in his words, this was the best damn vacation for him ever. He learned that Jason had once been a kid like him, deformed and despised. Even though he never talked, Davie says he knew that Jason knew what it was like to be ridiculed and abused, and that's why Jason would never hurt him. In fact, Jason would also bring Davie fresh fruit wrapped in a sheet. And guess what? The sheet looked just like the one we saw earlier when those people were saying grace. Yep, Jason killed them and took their food. Anyways, Jason continued the killings and Davie stayed with him. At first, Jason had to drag him along, kicking and screaming, and now he just followed Jason wherever the mass murderer went. Davie even picked up a knife to arm himself as if Jason was serving as his mentor. Meanwhile, the FBI and the National Guard were still no closer to finding Jason or the kid. However, Tannehill knew where Jason was headed and had decided to kill the child before he could open his mouth to the good guys. However, by now, news had spread that Tannehill was probably not clean and was wanted for questioning in 2 of the Piney Woods murders. However, Tannehill had already snuck into a National Guard chopper and hijacked it. It wasn't long before they found Jason and the kid, but Tannehill pushed one of the men, named Lamont, once again trying to make it look like an accident. He then asks the pilot to turn the chopper back around. Oh, and it seems Tannehill once served in the Texas Air National Guard, but you know what? Jason ripped the head out of Lamont's corpse and threw it like a large stone at the damn chopper, which not only broke the window, but also made the chopper crash, while Jason looked at the flames from a distance. Of course, the following day, more choppers came in for a search and rescue, but Tannehill found Davie much before that. Interestingly enough, by this point, Davie didn't wish to go home. He wanted to stay with Jason. Anyways, Tannehill was about to slit Davie's throat, but the kid had changed. He stabbed the crooked sheriff in the leg and pushed him down a crevasse, which was conveniently right there. Tannehill falls but survives, only to be swarmed by a colony of spiders. Meanwhile, the men find Jason, but Davie comes to his rescue, and so does Tannehill, who had somehow made his way back up. But Jason and Tannehill got into a brawl and fell down the cliff. Tannehill finally died, and Jason was once again lost in the woods. Davie was finally brought home, but he was forever changed by his time in the woods. He'd become like Jason. He didn't care if people died, he thought it was okay because he was different. So yeah, that's where the comic ends. Although we like what became of Davie Falkner in the end, we weren't really a fan of the whole Tannehill storyline, mostly because he wasn't a believable or relatable character. I mean, come on, a corrupt cop addicted to cocaine? That would never happen, right? Still, he's a bit over the top, but nevertheless, it's a fun read, and we recommend you pick it up next time you're in the comic book store. Unfortunately, that's all we got for you this time, folks, but we'll see you in the next one. As always, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.